All right, Smriti Menon. Here's take two of short takes. The first take involved you talking about your life, talking about the anecdotes, talking about the inspirations that led to some of the beautiful thoughts that we presented to our audience, who have already heard it, by the way. So if you haven't, you better do. So now let's talk about the professional, which is Smriti Menon. I'm going to throw a few questions your way, and hopefully your answers can be relatable, can be accessible, and then can be implementable. Fair enough?
Okay,
Not too much pressure.
cool. Let's go.
Let's
Let's
go.
go.
She's already up for the task. So, my first question, being in an industry that requires you to be an excellent communicator, given the fact that you're working with multiple artists, multiple creative individuals, as well as the brand, how do you become a better communicator professionally? Or rather, what is the difference in interpersonal communication and communication in the professional world?
Okay, first of all, that's a very, very broad question, and I don't think this limited amount of time that we have would actually do justice to it. But I'm gonna try. Okay, so primarily, I think the one difference I think there exists between personal and professional communication, interactions, whatever you want to call it, would be the level of filters you use. Because in a professional space or in a professional relation, you would probably have far more calculated and far more thought out uh, words, actions, and interactions, whereas in a more personal space, you either have more filters than needed or you don't have filters at all. And I think as far as professionally speaking is concerned, or communicating with people, uh, the driving force there would be just trying to find a win-win or a consensus or a common ground that can be mutually beneficial without straining the other. So I hope that answers your question. I mean, like I said, I would elaborate, but we're short on time.
Absolutely. So you can have disagreements and debates in a professional space, but the objective should be building a common ground or a consensus at all times. So I suppose that's a metric through which you can adjudge your professional conversations or communications in the future. My second question is a bit of a loaded question, so I'm going to deconstruct it for you. The question is, how does one write a biography? Now you're a creative director working with multiple brands, helping each of these brands tell their own story. These brands have their own perceptions of what their story is. You probably have your own perceptions or your own thoughts on the same. How do you bring all of this together and tell a compelling brand story?
In true millennial style, I'm going to use a quote I found on Tumblr to answer this, because I was once researching writing tips, and this was, I think, many years ago when Tumblr was still the fan. And what I read was, among other things, was one particular tip which said, if you're describing a war, don't describe the bombs or the rifles. Describe that little yellow sock which is burnt and lying on the ground after the war's over. So I think a lot of understanding and a lot of creating for brands comes from identifying what is below the surface, because anybody, as a graphic designer, as a creative person, as a music producer, as a videographer, you get to see what's on the surface. Like, a fashion brand is likely to be pink and black. There is no rocket science in it. But what makes your brand unique, and how do you bring that out to tell the world your story? I think that's what matters the most when it comes to understanding and writing or creating that biography, that brand narrative for each brand.
So basically, dig deep answer for a lot of the things that you said, right? Look beyond the surface is something that a lot of aspiring artists or brand builders should look into. The last question might sound simple on face, but is one that perhaps requires a lot of thought. So I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot. A lot of
No.
artists or a lot of people working in the creative industry have to be creative on a daily basis for their paycheck. Now, we associate creativity with inspiration that isn't found, but necessarily inspiration that finds you, correct? So, can the entire creative process have form and structure? And if so, what does that form and structure look
Okay, so there are two questions that you just asked me, and I think I'd like to break it into not watertight, but definitely distinct areas. The first one being the inspiration and the other one being execution. And I think where a lot of people, especially in the creative space, sort of struggle is translating from inspiration to execution. Now, execution has form, it has structure, it has deciding this border goes here and this border does not. Right. However, inspiration is all around you. If you cannot find inspiration in the blinking of traffic lights, in the rustling of leaves, in the way your dad's footsteps sound when he wakes up in the morning before his cup of coffee, then you're not really as creative as you claim to be, right? Because, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, but I think allowing yourself and opening yourself up to the inspiration around you. Like, I could be inspired by this conversation. Like, the next project I do, you never know. I mean, I could be inspired by something, I can see on the frame behind you, or I can be inspired by your shirt. So I think it's about opening yourself up to the inspiration around you and drawing that inspiration in an abstract form, but giving it structure by the time you execute it. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess the way to end that particular answer would be hashtag reality check. Because if you aren't waking up to inspiration, then you're perhaps not as creative as you thought. All right. I'm going to take note of that when I open my eyes tomorrow. So thank you so much, Smriti Menon, for not just introducing us to some of your anecdotes derived from personal experiences through life itself in the other video that people should have watched by now, but also by talking to us about some of the experiences that you've had in your professional life and how those experiences could be tapped into by creative people all around the world. So again, thank you. And to everyone that's tuned in, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, no matter what time of the day you accessed our video.